Okay, we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a new Indie Author Live chat. Today we have Robert with us. Robert, you are a multi award winning international best selling author. It's such an honor to have you on the channel. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of fantasy books you write?
Okay, thanks for having me here, Catherine. I co-author with my dad. We write classic fantasy, but with a little bit more of a modern twist. And our uh, our books are fairly long. um,
Yeah, like you'd
and
expect from an epic.
Yes, and we've been my dad's been working on this for about 30 plus years, and I joined him
Wow.
about let's see, 12 years ago. What year is it? It's 2023. Yeah, 12 years ago.
Wow.
And so we've just kind of been, working together and building this world that he's been working on for the last, 3 decades. I, when I was growing up, I actually heard a lot of the backstory and the lore and things like that as bedtime stories. And so
Oh,
it's kind of been ingrained in my brain. So whenever I think I come up with an idea, I pass it by my dad, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I already thought of that. That's
so,
exactly how I want it." So
so this is like the modern day J.R.R. and Christopher Tolkien
yeah,
for
yeah, a
the
little bit.
2020s.
Yep.
That's amazing. That's awesome. So your dad, isn't joining us today, but how has he taken to all the awards and just the recognition that your books have gotten?
At first, he was a little surprised, and because when we first published it, our debut was technically in 2013, so coming up on 10 years now, and it did all right. It did okay. Um, we then ended up rebranding the series, re-releasing again a few years later. Did a little better, not as well. And then when we relaunched again in 2019, um, and had a whole new start to the story, that's when the the accolades came in, the awards and everything else. And so I think the first time we won an award, he quoted Back to the Future and held up a copy of the book and said, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything."
Oh,
So he's been very pleased with it, and it's been fun.
and you're a father yourself, right?
Yes, yeah,
So are
I
you
have.
looping your kids in?
A little bit, yeah. So I've got four daughters. The oldest is 10, actually five. The next one is on the way. She should be here in June, as long as she
Oh,
doesn't come early, like the last one. Um,
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually have kind of come up with some bedtime stories that are kind of in universe, but not necessarily.
Yeah.
It's more portal fantasy based here in Earth.
Hmm.
But I pretty much just pull everything from like the magic system and some of the way we have our uh, mechanics for our fantasy universe playing here on Earth. And so it's been kind of a fun little story. And I've been actually uh, dictating these or recording them as I tell them.
Wow.
And I was actually figuring this out last year. I told about 100,000 words worth of story to my girls. So I was like, wow, this is great. Maybe I should actually turn these into something and sell them.
Yeah, and what a tradition to pass down too.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I have to ask,
Mhm.
has it been awkward working with your dad on the series or has it been sort of natural?
Oh, it's been smooth. It's so I'm an only child, and my dad and I are pretty close. In fact, he doesn't even really see himself as a dad and more like a big brother, and you
Oh,
know and so it's and he was an only child too, so I think he kind of was like, oh yay, another little boy, and like, little brother, let's do this, because he never had that. And
mm,
I mean, we're pretty close. We play video games together. We go to movies together. We do all kinds of stuff even now that I'm older. And so working together has just been, just another one of those things that dad and I do.
yeah.
it's been a lot of fun.
That's amazing. So how does co-writing work from, a series perspective? Do you flip books? Do you each have assigned characters? What does that look like?
So we used to go back and forth on writing passages, and we did that with our debut a bit. Um, I wanted to stay true to some of the things that my dad had written early on. So that
Mhm.
a lot of the prose from that our debut in 2013 was done between 2001 and 2010.
Mhm.
Um, and so there were a lot of passages that I kind of kept. We tweaked a little bit, but for the most part, they were how my dad had written it.
Mhm.
Um, and we kind of did that along the way, and for that first one, and and our roles have kind of shifted to being true co-authors where we're writing almost equally, to where the majority of the prose now is actually me,
Mhm.
and a lot of the we're just sticking with the same story ideas that my dad had. So there's not really, I guess at the moment, the way we co-author is we develop everything together. We do all the pre-writing, all the plotting, all the character development beforehand, and then I go write it, and then I
Mhm.
send it to him, and then we discuss it, talk about it, and sometimes he can see things a little better than I can, because I tend to get into the weeds
Mhm.
with the details. So he's kind of like the eye over my shoulder, and is like, oh, but look at that,
Mhm.
and try to focus on that. And so it's like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, that fixes the problem. Um, so we end up having this kind of a dynamic where he handles the broad strokes, bright colors, and I handle the nitty gritty detail.
Yeah.
Um, and so that tends to work better for us now, instead of us trying to write things. Plus, I type faster than he does, because he just kind of tick and text his way. Um,
The classic typewriter style typing.
yep.
Yes. Do you have any advice? We've had several new writers joining us since the panels in January, including a couple that were wanting to do a co authorship. Do you have any advice for new authors when it comes to co writing with someone?
Is so yeah, I have a couple things. One is, I guess I have advice in two areas: in craft and in the business.
Mhm.
Um, when it comes to craft, I think the best thing to do is to really discuss. I don't think there's a way to over discuss things when you're coming up, when you're working with somebody else,
Mhm.
especially with someone that's another walk of life, that has different life experiences, and that's not necessarily as close to the same mindset as like me and my dad.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think it's valuable to really be open and just keep dialogue flowing. I mean,
Mhm.
even with us, we will go back and forth, and it's just constant, just talking about whatever the issue in the plot is, or whatever is going on. So I feel like being able to discuss and communicate is probably the most important skill, I guess you could have
Mhm.
when working
Mhm.
with a co-author. Um, and of course, trying to figure out who's doing what, because I think if you have a clear understanding of what's going on, and um, what each person's tasks are, I think the
Mhm.
more success you'll have. Like, for instance, if you're going at every other character, let's say you have one main character for one writer and one main character for the other, it might be smart to have the author that's the whoever their POV is, perhaps
Mhm.
even write the dialogue for the what is happening in the other person's, if need be. So that way there's you stay true to the character's voice.
Mhm.
Um
Yeah.
and I think that's just kind of one little thing. As far as the business side, I think it's clear to either one, set up some type of entity where both of you have ownership, both of you have um, the rights to to the work, or that the entity has the rights to the work rather than one sole individual. Um, so there's a whole bunch of different business logistics that we could get into about that. But I think the best
Mhm.
thing is if you can bring everything together into some type of a business entity where both of you have it shared, I think you can avoid a lot of headaches, um,
Mhm.
and a lot of the stumbling blocks that could come with just going into it blind
Yeah, a lot
and
of the
trying to
stuff that
figure out.
writers don't think about on the back end. It's like you get
Yeah.
focused on the writing, and then there's all the real world backside to that. But shifting a little bit to your books, you have, like you said, some very large, very sprawling, epic fantasy worlds. They're very rich worlds. You've received numerous, just blown away reviews about your world building and your characters. And I've got to say, the one that we were featuring had dragons and a very unique twist on elves. How did you decide which fantasy characters to bring in, and was it difficult to put your own spin on like those classic characters?
Um, so I personally didn't really have too much to do with the say of that. That was just something my dad had wanted to do because he loves dragons and he loves elves because he's a very big Tolkien fan. And we wanted to. I remember we were talking about what he saw as the different races, species, I should say.
Mm,
Um, and he kind of saw the dragons, the elves, and the humans as like the three pillars of sentient beings on the world of Calda. Um, and so he uh, he liked the idea of having a long-lived race of elves, but not necessarily like Tolkien elves. Just that these elves, uh, they have a longer lifespan than the typical humans.
mhm,
Um, and so when we looked at when I joined, got on board with him, and we were figuring out how we were going to make it more distinct. Um,
mhm,
was we wanted to have three different ways of accessing the magic system. So the channels of power are the main magic system that you see in our series,
mhm,
but the humans that they all do it through incantation. So by focusing their minds and through the power of their word, um, but it's different for the way dragons do it, the way elves do it, and the way humans do it.
mm,
And so we kind of had this tiered system where the dragons are top tier of they can access the magic really quick, and then you
mhm.
have the elves, and then down here the humans. Um and you kind of that's not necessarily always the case, because something happens in our prequel novel that elevates one particular human like about up to here. um
You
and
get some
so
Skyrim vibes, but in a
yeah.
different original way.
Yes. Yep. And so it's kind of we wanted to have things that felt familiar, but that we thought, okay, well, how would we do this? And we both come from a gaming background too, so part of the way that we set things up was, okay, if we wanted to translate this into a video game or a
Mhm,
tabletop RPG, how how would that be able to best translate? And so we kind of took that avenue as far as the uniqueness of the different races in the world and just kind of the what's going on with all of
mhm.
them. So
Yeah. So you've got four main characters that you follow in A Prince's Errand. And for anybody
mhm.
watching live, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will pull them up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. Twitter people, you'll have to hop over to YouTube to drop your questions in there. But the link to A Prince's Errand and all of Robert and his father Dan's other books are in the description box as well. I mean, you've got a scholar, you've got assassins, you've got the prince. Um, and just so much going on. Which of the POVs is easiest for you to write, and which one was the hardest?
Hmm. Um, I think for me, uh, Cornar is probably the easiest for me. Um, and then next would be Iltar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Krindal was a little tougher. He's the scholar, writing a little bit from his POV, and I kind of had to dig deep into my own paranoia and be like, okay, what would it
Mm-hmm.
really be like to be this guy? Um,
Mm.
Kaiasis was not necessarily that much of a difficult issue for me to try to capture his character, but it was, I guess, the the way that I needed to write differently from his perspective of how he sees the world differently and how he would reference things differently was a shift, because before we were primarily writing from Iltar and Cornar's perspectives in our
Mm-hmm.
previous iterations. So
Mm-hmm.
they had a shared common understanding of things. So it was easier to just write things and
Mm-hmm.
almost had a omniscient type of style to it because we could have that.
Yeah.
Where with Kiesis, I had to, it was a shift because it was, oh, wait, he understands these different this particular topic differently, so I've got to write this differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not necessarily the voice but the way that I was conveying information with him, um, was harder because it, with Cornar and Iltar, it just felt like the normal traditional way of just kind of exploring a story, because a lot of the times they were finding something new. So they were
Mm-hmm.
exploring something new along with the reader, and that was easier to do. But
Mm-hmm.
with Kiesis, he knows certain things in the plot. He knows a lot of the things in the lore, and so he would refer to it differently.
Mm-hmm.
So that was probably the biggest challenge with him and getting that perspective to fit right.
Yeah. And they have very different reasons for going after this same thing, except for Iltar, who's not really as interested in going after everything. But for the prince, it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Like everything, his entire kingdom is really relying on him pulling this off, versus a more, I don't want to say casual because it wasn't casual, but more of a drive to know more, a drive to possess that those secrets. Um,
Mhm.
on the sake of, our scholar in the story, was it difficult for you to channel like the motivations and keep the reader engaged, you think, in such different stake levels?
Yeah, yeah, that it definitely took a lot of analysis to be like, okay, is this coming off right? Um
Mm-hmm.
and I like how you compared the different levels of that, because looking back at it, I don't know if I realized this at first, but Cornar's his lines were, okay, I'm just kind of going with the flow here, where
Mm-hmm.
and Krindal's like, oh, we're gonna do this, and
Yeah.
Kiesis is, this is the world.
Yeah.
And so you can see that, and looking back at it, I guess that kind of came naturally, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it was because I was trying to keep that the characters, um I guess, what am I trying to say? Their conflicts and their motivations in line with, um, kind of like the worldview too. Because and I think that kind of equates that, well, Cornar's just kind of exploring, and where he's learning all this new stuff. Krindal's got a little bit of knowledge, and so whenever you are in his perspective, he's got a little bit there, and so I guess it does kind of tie into the how what I had mentioned earlier, that it was a little more difficult to write Kiesis. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it was there. I just wasn't necessarily thinking about
Yeah, it all ends up working together beautifully. And I think what's really amazing to me about it is in the book, at some points, what they want actually seems to be at odds,
it.
because
Hmm.
Cornar really just wants to be home with his wife, And it's like, this is, I got the feeling that this is like his last big thing. Like, if I can just make it through this, I'm set for life.
Yeah.
And it was really unique to see that cast, because anybody can plug themselves into that story or into that journey. It's like, well, right now I would be this person. And then maybe if I reread this book 20 or 30 years from now, I see it differently from the point of view of the other person.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I wanted to try to create some diversity with that. Um, and that was actually one thing we were deliberately trying to do with this iteration, which was one of the things that made it get bigger. My initial outline for Prince's Errand was for it to be only about 75 to 80,000 words, and it came out to be 325,000 words. So it just kind of went, whew.
mhm.
Um, and part of it, I think, is because of the characterization and being able to really dig into a character's motivations and their thought processes, and it just kind of went it just grew, like
Mhm,
with a
mhm.
lot of the times, like the one of the techniques that I had learned from my mentor David Farland was you have different levels of showing that characterization where you can show their actions, and then you can kind of show like their internal thoughts through narration, and then really hit it home with dialogue. And there's whenever there was a specific thing that I wanted to hit home on, it would be, well, there would be a physical action associated, some type of a narration of their mentality, and then an actual internal dialogue where Cornar or Kiesis or Iltar is thinking it, and you get to read what their exact thoughts are on
Mhm, mhm.
whatever's happening.
Yeah. So I've I love the book. I'm a huge epic fantasy person. This has been really exciting, and I could just go on and on. And if I have something to tell the people viewing, you want to read this book. It is big, but don't be intimidated. It's exciting at the same time. There's actually several books. Robert has written several books. We've been talking about this one because it's the featured one for today, but there are several.
Yeah, so this is, well, a
A
Prince's
Princess
Errand for those
Errand.
of you watching, and to demonstrate the thickness of this monstrosity. Um, but the other books, the prequel novel that I kind of briefly mentioned was is called The Prisoner of Tartalum, and it takes place about 55 years before Prince's Errand, and features one of the major characters that's in the main cast, which you briefly meet him in A Prince's Errand, and he just seems like the really crazy old guy that tells weird stories.
Mhm.
And this is one of his crazy weird stories. Um, and we've got a bunch of short stories that are called The Untold Tales of Calda, that are just little things that I wanted to expand on the lore. Like in A Prince's Errand, there's these things called the Mistralim. They're the living statues, essentially. And
Mhm,
so
mhm.
little things like that, I wanted to say, okay, we didn't get a lot of detail into those origins, so why don't we write a short story around it? And so all of the Untold Tales stories are taking one particular or two particular aspects of the world and just focusing on that, and allowing the reader to really learn more, while also having a fun time, enjoying this little story. And
Mhm,
they're not
mhm.
too long. They're between 500, 5,000, and 13,000 words.
Oh
And
yeah.
we're hoping to get more of those out later this year. I've been working on some of those, so hopefully by this summer we should have 10 total short stories, and then eventually, maybe by Christmas, we'll be releasing a collection. Once I fulfill our latest Kickstarter, we're going to actually launch another one for the Untold Tales collection, which will be the first physical version of all of the short stories. And then we've
Wow.
got the companion story to A Prince's Errand, which is A Thief's Way, which is
Mhm.
another kind of short one. Um, and that was just kind of to illustrate what some of our other characters were doing that are not in A Prince's Errand. Um, but before in our prior iteration, we had wanted to do a main novel and then a companion story.
Mhm.
And because we have so many threads going on that we wanted to say, okay, well, this is what's happening here, and we want to be able to show that. So going forward, we have planned a companion story for each of the big novels. So there's a lot of little things that they'll kind of interconnect, and they won't
Mhm.
be necessary reads, but they will really open up the world for whoever reads those in addition to the main books.
Mhm. Mhm. So you've got all these writing things planned. You've got lots of books for people to be reading while they're waiting on the new things. If this is your first time coming across Robert's work, you got time to catch up. But do you have any live events planned? I know you're a very family focused person and everything, and the pestilence has kept a lot of us out of the reader scene. But do you have any live signings or reader
Um,
events?
the only one that we have set in stone is FanX in September in Salt Lake City. We're
Wow.
actually going to be. Last year we put together a mega booth with, I think there were 11 other indie authors. And this year we've got a bigger booth. We have a 20 by 30 island that will be up by the Celebrity Row. With I think we're going to have about 14. I've got to confirm everybody for sure, but a few readers that will be there. Christopher Russell um, is coming. Joanna Reeder, um,
Oh, yes, she was
David
just on
Trotter.
doing a read on here, and David has done a panel with us too.
Oh, cool.
See, everybody, you want to go to this? There's all these people that we know.
Yep, we've got. I'm just trying to remember. Oh, Lachelle Slater, A.L. Lawrenson, Ashley Lawrenson,
Hmm.
um, and Katie Cherry is going to be there.
Yes.
And I'm trying to. Who else was there? I'm racking my brain. Oh, Tora Moon. Um,
So a lot of
and
indie fantasy addict Facebook group people.
yes, yeah. So there's a good deal of us, and we might. I know I was talking to Rachel Renner about this, so she might be there. MH Woods Court is someone that might be joining us too. She was at FanX last year, but not at our booth with us, so we were doing some
Hmm.
cross promoting. Um, but hopefully we'll have about 15 or so of us that will be there, and we might be putting together a special anthology that we're going
Nice.
to be selling for the con. It might be a con exclusive, so
Very,
definitely
very exciting.
definitely come out, meet us, and have some fun. FanX is a great event. We've been doing FanX since 2015, and it's been a lot of fun to meet readers and sell books and just enjoy the atmosphere. It's a fun event.
Definitely. And for those who are watching, if you don't know what Indie Fantasy Addicts is, I'll drop the link in the in the comments box. I need to add it to the description box. It's really a great group for readers or authors like me who are addicted to reading other people's books when I should be writing. Uh,
Yep.
yeah, but I joined last summer, and there's a big summer reading challenge that this group does where authors give away prizes at the end of the summer, and you can share indie book recs. And yeah, it's great. So there it is for the people watching on Twitter. I'll give you a second to comment or copy it down. Um, but Robert, this has been amazing. I'm just in awe of your work. So
Well,
many
thank
indie
you.
authors, I think Amazon said, only make it a year to 2 years in the indie publishing industry. And you're here almost 10 years later, going stronger than ever.
Yeah.
It's really inspiring.
Oh, thank you. Well, I hope so. I really want other indies to succeed, and I know how much of a struggle it was for the first, I would say, 7 years or so. We were kind of going it alone, and then it
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, no, we got to change this and branch out and build some more connections with other indie fantasy authors. And that's one thing I really love about IFA is there's just a camaraderie there, and even on the author end, it's just a big family. We
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you knew this, but or the 20 books to 50K, there was about 40 of us. We all got together and just met and had fun, had dinner, and it was just fantastic. So
That's
it's a great
awesome.
community.
Yes. So come join, read even more books,
Yep.
add Roberts to your list for this summer because you get points per page count in the summer
Yes.
challenge. So that would be a great time to catch up on Roberts' books.
Yep. And hopefully the second book will be out by then. We're still in the getting it polished and finished off. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. Everybody, go give Robert a follow on Facebook. I dropped the link in the description on YouTube. And if you would like to meet some of these other authors, several of the authors Robert has mentioned has already been on the channel this year. You can see them in either the Indie Author Live Reads playlist or the Indie Author Live Chats playlist. I've got too many playlists. And more are coming. We have authors that will be joining almost every day now through March. So you can come and meet everybody. But thank you again, Robert. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
thank you. You too.
Bye, everybody.